You're listening to Sustainably Geeky, the podcast for everyday environmentalists.
Hi, and welcome to Sustainably Geeky, episode 21. I'm your host, Jennifer, and I am joined today by Chris and Jen.
Hi, guys.
And Jen is actually going to be our expert guest today. We wanted to talk about how to make your home more sustainable, and Jen is a LEED certified expert on that. So she's her day job when she's not hanging out with us here on the show is program manager for the National Defense Center for Energy and the Environment, which is a mouthful. So Jen, tell us a little more about what you do and kind of your experience, I guess, in the green building world.
Sure. So when I started out at Fort Hood a long time ago, I was the LEED accredited professional at that Army installation to ensure that all the buildings were meeting the standards for high performance requirements. Basically just reviewing the designs and specifications for new construction and making sure that it was energy efficient, water efficient, looking at the materials that were going into the building to make it more sustainable. And, now I do something very different, but because we wanted to talk about how homeowners can improve the value of their home and decrease their bills for electrical and water, I was asked to talk about it on the show today. So
awesome.
Here we are.
Yeah, before we jump into that, I'm curious, so do most government or Army buildings require LEED certification? Is that kind of a blanket thing that they all build to now?
Yeah, so there's a memorandum that always gets sent out every couple of years because they revise it, but it requires a policy that requires all federal buildings to meet high performance standards. And the Army adopted the LEED certification program, which stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. So that certification just has a rating system, and it's easier to follow when you kind of have a ranking system, and it's a little bit more robust than some of the other ones out there. So that was what the Army chose.
That's pretty cool. It's good to know that that's kind of the standard across the board in the government or federal buildings right now.
Yeah, I actually got really interested in it because, right out of school, you don't really learn about this kind of stuff in environmental science. But when I found out that the amount of impact we have with our buildings, whether it's your home or your office or retail, that is the majority of the use of electricity in the world. So I think it trumps, for energy at least, it trumps some of the other industries out there. So when I found out the amount of impact you can have by just making a building more efficient, I was excited to get into that field.
Yeah, there's a lot of opportunity out there, like you said, whether it's your home or business, and there's a lot of buildings that weren't built to these standards, but that could probably be brought up to them and, like you said, just make a big difference. So while we're talking about LEED, can you kind of go over the process for getting certified for that and what that looks like, and maybe kind of some of the steps that you talked about that you have to follow to get a LEED certified building, whether it's a home or a different type of structure?
Yeah, so there's 7 or 8 different rating systems within LEED. I think they keep growing. So it could be for retail spaces. Some of it's just for interior spaces for renters. If you're a business and you don't own that building, but you're going to, do the inside space. So there's hospitals, commercial buildings, and obviously homes. So basically the process would be is you have to hire a LEED accredited professional to be on your design team if you don't already have one, to consult and help them understand the process and the requirements. And then you have design charrettes to determine what the owner's requirements are and what they want to put into this building, and making sure they understand what all the LEED rating system points are, and then they can choose, which components they want to include in the building, because obviously some stuff costs more than others, and it has, a return on investment that's different. So You kind of weigh all those pros and cons with that team. And then from there, you get it constructed. And that lead AP is usually the person that can enter in all of the information into the lead online portal to ensure that they're going to get certification and credit for everything that they've done. And then the U.S. Green Building Council, who actually owns the LEED rating system, they will ensure that the building meets those requirements, and then they'll validate it, and then hopefully it all goes well and you can get your certification.
Is it something they have to renew every year, or like every few years? How does that work?
No, if it's an initial kind of new construction, you just have that initial review. I think they have been updating the rating system every year, so I think now you might have to submit like your energy bill or your water bill to prove that what your designed building was supposed to create is actually in fact doing that. But you wouldn't necessarily like lose your certification, I don't think, unless things have changed. And then there's also something called like renovations. So as you own your building over time and you want to make modifications, or maybe you bought an old building and you want to do renovations, there's a different rating system for that. And those are things you could do over a long period of time. Like maybe you're not going to do it all at once. And so you could, over years, kind of build that certification for the building.
Cool. What are the main reasons people will get a certification like that? I mean, I'm sure some of it is altruistic, like I want to help the environment, but like you said, there's a cost savings associated with a lot of that as well.
Well, I think this all kind of initiated because a lot of architects and building owners were already doing a lot of green features to their buildings, and they felt like they couldn't really show it off and get credit for it. And so these rating systems, and there's multiple programs out there other than LEED, but it gives those individuals an opportunity to say, hey, look, I got a LEED Platinum building, and these are the savings that we're getting. And I really think it was to help promote, the issues we're having with climate change. Architects felt like they have an impact and have the opportunity to make significant change in that area. And so this was kind of where it all came from. So that's the importance of it. And I think people want to do it because they know that, one, building owners want to get customers in the door, and they know that this generation is interested in having green features. And so I think that's probably a lot of the reason that building owners want to do it, is because they know that there's a desire for their customers.
Yeah. It definitely makes it more interesting. And having seen a few LEED buildings myself, I can attest that like when I find out it's LEED, I'm like, oh, I'm intrigued to go look around and find out, what they did here or there. And usually they'll have signs and pictures showing it off, like you said, so you can kind of, take it all in, and then you're more likely to partake in whatever they're doing there. So
yeah, I mean, there was a lot of criticism in the beginning of all this, greenwashing and stuff. So this certification process has evolved over time, and they're trying to use the LEED rating system as a means to ensure that not only are we validating that the buildings are in fact doing what they're designed to do, but also getting, those energy bills and those water bills down. Like, in the investors in these properties want to have energy cost savings and return on those investments. And so that's why this rating system is good to have. Yeah.
So for the benefit of Chris and anyone else not in the U.S. listening, is this an international certification, or there's just the U.S.? Or
I think Chris missed the question.
No, I was asking you. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
It was LEED an international certification thing.
Oh, yeah.
I'm
Sorry.
Yeah, so internationally, LEED is used. There's U.S. Green Building Council has chapters in every major city, it seems, and it is a worldwide program.
Awesome. Okay.
Sorry, I thought that question was
I may have phrased it confusingly. It's fine.
It's okay.
Okay, so Chris, do you have any questions before we move on to kind of the topic at hand here?
So are you finding that more and more like, forget the whole mandate and everything like that, are more and more people voluntarily wanting to do these certifications and actively seeking out wanting to be sustainable with their buildings and their property purchases? Is there more of an uptick now than there was before?
Yeah, I think in the beginning of LEED, there was a lot of heartache over the extra price that you had to pay to have a building LEED certified. But I think now that it's become more like mainstream and more people know how to do it, the costs have come down. Like anything new, it's really kind of expensive in the beginning, like solar panels, and now that it's more mainstream, the price has gone down. So it's similar like that for the certification program. So I think, yes, like in general, more people are wanting to do these certifications because they are seeing the benefit of it. They have healthier buildings, they have happier personnel, staff in their buildings, they have less turnover. So there's a lot of second and third order effects of having a healthy, sustainable building that people want to be in. And, it's not always like a dollar figure, necessarily a direct return on investment type thing. It can have, some stuff that you don't necessarily even think of, like, oh, I noticed that less people are calling in sick. They actually want to be here, or they're not getting sick because the building doesn't have asbestos and lead-based paint in it, and all these things that make people have less energy and not feel well. So,
They can see
I think
nature and light.
yeah, exactly, like windows and so yeah. So I think too, like a lot of chains out there, like Walmart, for example, has started to adopt. Starbucks has started to adopt. So all these retail, box, I don't know, like buildings, they can just like copycat one another, and they don't have to necessarily do a whole lot of work because their design is pretty much the same wherever they build. So once they've done one building, they can do all the rest that way as well. So yeah, we've seen an upward interest in it.
That's good.
You mentioned the cost. So what is that based on? Is that based on the size, the type, the construction, or kind of all the above?
The cost for the certification?
Yeah.
It does vary based on the size of the project, just because it's that many more components that would need to go into the building. So a hospital might cost a little bit more, like price per square foot compared to a regular retail space. And so it just again depends on which features the building owner wants to put in. But as far as LEED, like direct LEED costs, those are all pretty much the same. Like unless it just requires a whole lot more man hours because it's such a large project. But it should be pretty comparable to the size, like a percentage is,
Awesome.
What I mean? But the cost to actually get it certified is the same for everybody.
Okay. Gotcha. Well, I have, like I said, seen a few buildings, and if you have the chance to pop into one, I highly suggest it. I think the new Austin Public Library in downtown is certified LEED, like platinum, and that's a cool building. They have a rooftop garden and a lot of different features that make it just stand out, just visually and the feel of it, when you get in there. And I was very impressed. So if you're in an area where you have a building, go check it out.
So I think the city of Austin has their own rating system. And so any city building has to meet those requirements. So even like the homeless shelter that they built downtown and City Hall, all those, main like city-owned buildings, they comply with the Austin Green Building certification, which is very similar to LEED. They just, have a little different format.
Cool. Well, let's move into the residential side of things. So you mentioned that LEED has a residential component, and I'm curious to hear kind of what the suggestions are for that, and does a homeowner or a home builder go through the same process as like a commercial building, or is it a little different?
It is a little bit different, just, size wise. A single family home is going to be, average around 1,500, 2,000 square feet versus a commercial building that can be much larger. So the rating systems just vary based on the type of building and what their energy consumption might be, differing from a home and that kind of thing. So, but in general, they have these like 5 major categories that they typically look at, and some of it varies here and there, but it's always kind of looking at the site. So, and I'll go into detail in all of these, but it's looking at the site, looking at water, energy, materials, and indoor air quality. So those are kind of the main 5 factors that, and also waste management is one of them as well. So those are kind of the main focus areas, I guess, of most rating systems. So I guess to answer your question, if it's a new construction, like if you're a builder, you're going to have more of a focus on the site and making sure you're meeting those requirements versus if you're already a homeowner, there's not a whole lot that you can do. But in general, they always say, location, location, location. So just make sure that you're picking a spot that's not going to be in like a flood zone or near a wetlands. They typically want you to not have to cut down a bunch of trees to put down your foundation on the home. So a site that's already been disturbed and you can just build on top of that site is kind of the things that they look at. They also look at close proximity to community resources so that you're not having to drive a long way for groceries and just things that you might need at your home. So one of the other things is looking for permeable surfaces. So you don't want to kind of be in an area where everything is concreted and asphalt. You want to have some kind of grass or open paved system or gravel so water can get into the ground. And shade trees, like making sure your house can be shaded, especially in Texas. That really helps with your energy bill as well. So that's kind of the main things for the site that you would look at. Whether you're going to be buying a new home or if you're going to, if you're a builder and you're building a home. So I don't know if you guys want to talk about that, or I can move on to water.
Yeah, I can see how that would be more of a new construction concern. So yeah, you can't really control a lot of the things when it comes to a site, but I guess the focus would be more on if you had to pick, more urban than rural, right? Because you said like proximity to things. So if you're out in the country, you'd get kind of a lower rating or less focus on that than if you were in a city where there's already infrastructure and everything's nearby.
Yeah, so some of the rating systems give points for high density buildings. So if you're in, a townhome, for example, everything is going vertical instead of being spread out and disturbing more land. But then, yes, you'd also still want to make sure that you have some green space around you. So, it's finding a balancing act, and you can, I feel like there's never like a perfect home. Like there's always something wrong. But yeah, so if you're ever looking for a new home or you're going to be, if you're a builder and you're building, you kind of want to find something that's closer to the community resources if you can, because that will reduce your transportation costs.
Until we can get like floating homes and like there's grass and then the house floats somehow or is on a pedestal. We can have both.
Well, a lot of people build their houses on stilts. Like they leave the grass in the ground alone and they just, put their car underneath it, like park underneath the house without an actual garage. Like there's no foundation. So
terrifying. But yeah, I have seen
and
that.
obviously I know you're in Canada, so here in Texas we're going to have a lot of, and that's one of the things that the energy, when we get into energy, is pretty interesting. Depending on the region that you're in, there's a lot of different, so it's called ASHRAE. I can't remember the acronym, but it's a standard for different energy requirements based on the region that you're in. And it'll tell you if you live in this zone, this is the type of features you should be including in your building to make it more energy efficient. But anyways.
We were just talking about sites, and I was just, your floor would be so cold in the winter time. It would be terrible. Oh.
See, in Texas, we're like, that creates air and it'll keep the house cool.
Right.
So that's
we don't have basements here. So.
There's different construction techniques all around the world depending on the climate. That's just how it is.
Oh yeah, and then you guys don't have to worry about snow load, so your joists don't have to be as close as ours.
Yeah.
Snow load. We don't have to worry about earthquakes, so we're not worried about the engineering with that, and we don't have to worry about tornadoes and flushes and all that kind of stuff either. But with the marsh too, like most of Southern Ontario used to be a big giant marsh, so that's the problem that some new builders have is building on floodplains in marsh area that are going to flood. So on the radio, they've done this campaign where if you are a developer or you've purchased a plot of land and you want to build on it, please contact the conservation area. They will have maps and site surveys to show you where areas on your land are prone to floods or marshland, and where would be the best spots to build, so you avoid you've built your home and then it floods, things like that. So how to avoid that kind of insurance nightmare.
Yeah, so it was interesting when I moved to San Antonio. A lot of the older homes around here are all pier and beam. So it's just like beams that have been drilled into the ground, and the house is actually, kind of like floating above the soil. But it's actually beneficial here because if you have high clay content in your soil, you get that like shrink and swell, and so your foundations crack and it causes problems. And it could cost $30,000 to fix your foundation if you have a regular concrete slab. So having pier and beam, you can just do, $1,000 or $2,000 tweak to make sure your house is still good to go every couple years. So yeah, some of these houses around here are like over 100 years old and they're still in good condition. They don't have all these cracked drywall and foundation problems like some of the regular new foundations have. So
yeah, the
you have
shifting
to pay
is real.
attention to your soil when you're buying a new home. And always look in the garage because that's typically not going to have like wood or tile over it. And so if you see a lot of cracks in that concrete foundation, then it's going to be a problem. Okay, so we're going to move on to water. We good?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So for water, there's a lot of different points you can get for having low flow toilets and faucets, shower heads. There's WaterSense is the certification logo that you can see on some of the packaging that you can, if you go to Walmart or Lowe's or something to buy fixtures, you want to look for the WaterSense logo. And that could be on your dishwasher. So there's like a lot of these new dishwashers that are like, we're going to get all the food off of your plate. You don't have to pre-wash at all. Well, you actually end up using like a ton more water. So that's just something to consider when you're buying new appliances. And then obviously the number one user of water in Texas, at least maybe, is landscaping. So like paying for the sprinkler system. So another thing to look at is xeriscaping, buy local plants. So xeriscaping is like using rocks and like that Arizona type style landscape design. A lot of people in San Antonio actually use like the fake grass.
Turf.
Yeah, there we go, turf.
Or you can just do like me and let the grass die and you don't have to cut it because lawns are stupid anyways, but that's a whole other topic.
Yes. And then some interesting things I've seen too is if you're able, depending on where your washing machine is located, I saw someone kind of like take the water hose out through a window, the water that drains out of the washing machine, and they like put it into a rainwater harvesting tank. So you can also get rainwater, but you can also get the gray water from your washing machine pretty easily. Or just drill a hole through the side of your wall, whatever, it's fine. So that's just kind of a little brief intro to water, like some of the things to look for. And if you're buying an existing home or you have a current home and you want to renovate, those are just some of the quick things you can do is all of your fixtures and appliances that use water. So even like your washing machine, getting the ones that are horizontal load instead of vertical from the top, it uses less water because it circulates the water. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't know that.
So yeah, they call them side loader washing
Front
machines
loading,
instead of the top load kind. Yeah. And it also doesn't have that little like agitator thing in the middle. It's just kind of, there's nothing in there. So your clothes can't get like ripped up as easily.
Mm-hmm.
So
The thing that just catches all the slime and grossness.
No, there's so
it's
in
like,
some
it
washing
just gets
machines
dirty.
some washing machines that are top loaded have a center bar that like agitates and rotates. Like that doesn't exist in the side loaded washing machine.
I have one and it just gets gross. Like
everything
gets in it and it gets anyways. Water is a big one that like a big way that people can make a difference in, like you said, the aerators, in putting timers on things or fixing drips, like in addition to all the stuff we talk about this in like all the previous episodes, but there's a
baths. I've noticed we haven't had a bathtub for like over 6 years, and we have a really small hot water tank here, and it works great for us because we don't have to take baths. Unless you have little ones who take baths constantly gross. Taking a bath all the time, it uses up so much water, and
they're so annoying. Baths are not comfortable.
Once in a while it's nice. The bath every night's a bit much.
I want to say, depending on where you live, like in your region, up to 75% of your water bill can be landscaping. So, one, don't have it, or two, if you do have it, especially because you do want shade trees and stuff for your home and you want to keep them alive if you're in a drought area. But drip irrigation is one of the best approaches because it reduces the amount of evaporation. And there's always like kind of this general rule, at least in Texas, that you would want to water around like 4 or 5 a.m. So that you're not, at the heat of the day, like losing a lot of the water to evaporation as well. So, so back to like behavior modification versus buying this really fancy, low flow or like dishwasher. Like if you're not fully loading the dishwasher 100% all the time, then you're going to be wasting water as well. So that's kind of one of the things that I think LEED was looking at is, it's great that we have all these design features and appliances and components, but if the people inside the building aren't using them properly and maintaining them properly, then you're not getting the benefit out of it as it's intended. So that's part of this conversation too, if we want, is like, what are some of the things you can do as far as an action a person can take versus, what appliance should I buy?
And the same goes for washing your clothes. If you just do half load or quarter load, versus a full load, you're using almost the same amount of water or electricity, right, to wash less. I had a question about water heaters because Chris mentioned this. Don't they make now smaller heaters that you can put at each appliance that are more efficient and they don't store the water like your old tanks that have like 100 gallons or something crazy?
It's called a tankless water heater. So at every kind of faucet or shower head that you have, there's this little box that heats up the water as it goes through the pipe. And so it can be electric or gas, depending on what, system you want to use. I think gas is more efficient. But yeah, I think I've seen it all over the world. A little bit less prevalent in the US, but it's starting to get there. So I think that's the way to go, personally.
Are they more affordable? I mean, when you look at the cost of a giant water heater versus like you need 4 or 5, maybe, I don't know, in your house?
Yeah, I think I haven't priced them out to be able to answer that, but I think the long-term return on investment is there, especially, if you've got to shell out a couple $1,000s for one of those huge water heaters that actually don't always perform very well if you're not maintaining it. Like a lot of people kind of forget about it. And you are supposed to actually like drain them every year, and because sediment from the water can collect in the bottom, and so
never
you don't have as much water that can stay in there. So yeah, there's all kinds of problems.
I've actually been thinking, I need to look into maintenance for my water heater because it's been 10 years since I bought this place and I have never done anything with it, and I'm terrified that it's just gonna one day. So
yeah, like I had a brand new house when I first moved to Temple, and I was just like, oh, this is a brand new house. I don't have to worry about any of this stuff. It was like 2 or 3 years later, the water heater just stopped like working, and I was like, what's going on? And they were like, oh, you're supposed to drain this every year because the little, like there's certain little nodes that like can react if it hasn't been properly maintained, and it can burn out. Like some of the components can burn out. And maybe it's these newer, like newer stuff sometimes doesn't always work as good as the older stuff. But yeah.
Well, great. I'll add that to my never-ending list of repairs for my house.
And I think too, people like it because, I don't know, if you've got 5 people in your family and everyone wants to take a shower, and maybe you have like 2 or 3 showers in your house, like everybody can go at once. You don't have to worry about like, okay, we have to space everyone out, and we have to let the water heater heat the water back up.
So we have to do.
Yeah, and it's not holding gallons and gallons of water and wasting it like.
Right. So I think the energy savings alone is what that return on investment comparison would be, because you pay a lot of money to keep that water hot 24/7 versus let's just turn on this little tankless water heater component for the brief, 10-minute shower that you take. So, I think it's definitely the way to go if you have the means to do so.
Yeah, I think we had a friend who built a house a couple of years ago, brand new, and I hope it's code now for brand new builds, residential builds, to have the tankless water heaters, just because they're more efficient now than when they first came out. So he's got one in his house and he loves it because, there's pros and cons. Pros, you're not sitting there heating water all the time. Con is you have an endless supply of hot water, so you're not crying in the shower and then all of a sudden it goes cold and that's your time to get out. It's like you can try it for like 4 hours if you want to. It's never going to get cold ever. So there's that too. And he loves it. It's a great system. And then for watering up here, there's bylaws depending on the town. So it depends on your house number. So if you're an odd number, you have to water your lawn on odd days from like 7 at night to 7 in the morning and things like that. A lot of people have automatic sprinklers. And then some people tap into what's called a sand point. So then you're not using municipal water. You're just tapped into your own little personal aquifer, and you can do that. Ray's parents had a sand point in one of their houses in Sauble Beach. It was the best water ever. It was so good and so sweet. And that's what they used to water their stuff. But again, they didn't water it every day, and it was usually in the evening. And but also you could just, tear up your lawn and plant gardens instead, because lawns are, unless you have little kids running around, very useful.
Okay. So this is a good segue to energy.
Yeah.
The tankless water heater usually falls under the energy category. Because, it's the electrical heating of it and all that. So the first thing is to look for appliances that have the Energy Star logo certification on any of those types of appliances that you might buy. So your oven, what else? Your HVAC unit, refrigerator, those types of things. And I think even dishwashers will have Energy Star ratings as well. So you would look for the WaterSense and the Energy Star rating for those appliances. And then so for HVAC units also, there's something called a SEER rating, and you can just Google it. It's SEER. So whenever you're buying your HVAC unit, you could get something that is SEER 23, but the standard for a builder might be like SEER 8 or 10. But when you look at the energy savings, it sometimes makes sense. So it's just a more efficient unit, and some of them can save up to like 50% compared to some of the SEER ratings that are a lot lower. So if you're buying a home that already has one, ask what the SEER rating is. The higher the number, the better. I think it goes high as, like 23, 24. And yeah, if you have to replace one, then that's kind of that return on investment calculation you're going to have to do based on what your electrical rate is and how much your annual payment is. And you can calculate how fast you would, pay that unit off, and just make sure that, the unit has a warranty or is designed to last 10 plus years. So you can kind of figure those financial decisions up on your own. Another thing is solar panels. There's a lot of rebate programs out there to put solar panels on your home. I think even here in San Antonio, it's free to have it put on your house. And so there's no like investment, because the electricity goes to their main grid. And so you're not necessarily, you're helping them out. Like when you're not using electricity, you're
selling it back.
Yeah. So it pays itself off pretty quickly. Another thing that a lot of people ignore is air leaks. So if you calculate, there's, air leak detection technology out there, but most homeowners, aren't going to do that. There's it's a thermal image that you can get. So if it's a hot day and you see cool air coming out of your windows and doors, you've got air leaks. And so, just an annual check on the caulking, like the sealant between the window and door and the home, like siding, whatever siding you have, just making sure that and the best thing that I've done is just on like a windy day, I can, kind of put my hand around the doors and windows and see if I feel any drafts. If you can't afford to have thermal imaging done on your home. So air leaks are important. I've also seen these interesting like weather stripping that you can put at the bottom of a lot of door gaps, and it'll help prevent like any air going in and out, because some of that flimsy weather stripping that you get from the original home is not really going to last very long and do a whole lot. So you can replace that.
You can do the tried and true like towel. It's at the bottom of your doorway or whatever. Blanket, whatever you have laying around.
Yeah.
If all else fails.
So there's windows. There's single pane, double pane, triple pane. Triple pane, obviously, you would have, more energy efficiency. It's preventing that thermal heat gain that goes through the window into the inside of your home. There's also films and tints that you can put on existing windows. So if you're not going to be replacing the entire window itself, you can buy this film that can go on the inside of your house, and it kind of like bounces the heat back outside.
I tried that. Is that the stuff you use the hair dryer for? So like the plastic film that you get heat and you put it on. Anyways, it didn't work for me, but I also probably did it wrong.
You couldn't get it to stick, or
I
what?
could not get it to stick. It took so long. I just felt ridiculous, and I gave up. I was like, I'm donating the rest of these to Habitat for Humanity.
There's companies that you typically hire to do it. It's a more professional film, and it'll stick and work. So the do-it-yourself maybe is a little bit harder. But so I'm in a townhome, so there's 14 units, and we're all, kind of like side by side. And some of them did the thin film, and they noticed that they had significant decrease in their electrical bill because we have some west-facing windows. So that's another thing to look for is if you're buying a home, generally you want most of your windows facing north if possible, so you can still get that light into the interior space, but you're not going to get as much heat gain just because of the angle of the sun and where it goes over the earth. So, north and east sides of the house, that's the cooler parts, and so that's where you would want windows. You want to reduce the amount of windows that are on your south side and on your west side. And if you do have windows in those areas, you would want to have some kind of overhang. So sometimes you'll see, especially in commercial buildings, they'll have these large roof overhangs that kind of like jet out. Well, a lot of that is to block the sun and create shade on those windows, but still getting that light into the space.
You're just giving me more projects for my house. It's like I'm counting my windows. I'm like, 3/4 of them are on the south and west sides. Great.
So that is one thing, like when builders are building, they'll let you know, oh, these are double pane windows, and so because single pane is pretty bad, it doesn't really create any kind of buffer. But you could also get, if you can't afford to replace the windows, using this thin film is an option. Creating shade exteriorly with one of those like canvas kind of overhang situations could work. I purchased solar shades, and it blocks out 99% of the solar gain coming in through the window. It's one of those that just kind of like rolls up and down. It doesn't have any kind of blinds. It's just like a full piece of fabric. So there's a lot about windows and heat gain, because you obviously half of your electricity bill is your HVAC unit. So the heat gain or loss, depending on the time of the season, is where you're going to be saving a lot of your money on your HVAC if you can keep they call it having like a tight envelope, making sure you don't have those air leaks, and then also making sure you're reducing the amount of heat or cold that can escape. So just things to think about.
I can attest to the double pane windows. I got them last year, and my old ones would just sweat anytime it got really cold or rainy. I mean, everything would come in and pile on the windowsill. It was gross and annoying and freezing all the time. So these are much prettier.
Were they single pane?
Yeah, they were single pane, and
okay.
like you said, barely any buffer. Now there's 2 of them, so they insulate better, and I can actually open my windows on a nice day as opposed to before. Half of them wouldn't work, so it brings down my
someone gave me like a visual, like when it came to air leaks, and they said if you were to count up all of the air leaks around every single window or door, because those are all penetrations through the main siding of your home, it would actually equate to like a big size, like a basketball size hole, like just in your house. Like wow. Imagine just like having a window open. So when you don't have that tight envelope, and obviously there's always going to be a little like wiggle room with that, because you don't want it to be too tight. You want some humidity to be able to escape. You don't want to create like a mold problem. But again, it depends on climate and where you live and everything. So I always thought that was interesting. But insulation is another one. So insulation in your walls is really important. If you're buying a new home, ask them what is the insulation value. It's called an R value. So the higher the number, the better. And insulation in the roof. So a lot of people kind of got onto this like spray foam thing. You can spray the foam on the very top part of your roof, instead of having that insulation that's on that bottom like walkable attic level in your home. So that's an option. A lot of folks kind of like tried it out and maybe didn't like it, because if they ever had a roof leak, then they had to like figure out where the leak was. It's a little bit harder. So that could be a problem. But there's all kinds of insulation. They call it like bat insulation, where it just goes on the floor level of the walkable part of your attic. And so that's just, keeping a lot of the hot air that is gained into your roof out of the air conditioned space of your home. And there's also something called a radiant heat barrier. It's this it looks like aluminum foil to me, but there's more to it. But they put it in the actual roof component. So you have like your asphalt shingles or your metal roof, and then there's kind of like a waterproofing barrier, and then there's this radiant barrier. So any heat gain would kind of like bounce out. Same kind of concept to that thin film on the window. So some of the newer houses I was looking at, they would be like, see, look, we left a little piece open so you could see there's a radiant barrier. Because you wouldn't know that it's there, unless someone left a little cutout to like show that it exists. What else? So again, roof material is important. So obviously the cheapest is going to be like your asphalt shingles, which the majority of people have. But you could get a little bit more energy efficiency from like a lighter color. So instead of getting like a dark black, which absorbs that heat, you could get a lighter white or, tan or something beige. And so that would help. More expensive options would be the metal roof, but that actually lasts like so much longer. So if you are going to live in this home for, 10, 20 years, it could be worth putting a metal roof on, just depending if you have a lot of hail. A lot of those asphalt shingles just deteriorate.
That doesn't hold the heat too because it's a conductor?
So it's painted with white, and so it kind of, it's a reflection.
Okay. Cool.
So, and then you can, if you get, it's called standing seam metal roof. Those can easily be, like solar panels can easily be attached to those. Instead of having to make like penetrations into your actual roof surface, they're able to kind of like clamp on to some of those areas within the roof a little bit easier when you have that standing seam metal roof. What else have we not covered? Oh, so this is a behavior thing, but it's also something you can buy. It's the programmable thermostat. So that gives you the opportunity to dial in by the day, by the hour, what temperature you want your home to be at. And this can be a major cost savings as well. So if no one's in the home, and it's winter time, you could have it all the way down to like 60 if you wanted to. And then you have it set so you ramp it up to 65 before people are going to be arriving. So it's warmed up a little bit. And then in the summertime, so there's kind of ranges of where people tell you to like, you don't want to go too cold because then your pipes might freeze or something. Probably not, but, you don't want to overwork your system too much. So there's kind of like a happy range. So you kind of don't want to go below, 62. And you wouldn't want to go above, 68, 69 when you're in the home as far as heat temperatures are concerned. And in the summertime, if you're not home, you generally would keep it around like 78 if you're, not in the home. And then you could have it go to like 75, 74 when you're actually in the house. And a lot of people take liberties with those numbers because they want to save more energy. But sometimes if you go too high or too low, the HVAC system has to work so hard to like create that temperature change within such a short period of time that it can kind of overwork it, and you end up kind of wasting your savings in a way. So
see, my comfortable temperature in the summer is like a 78 degree AC, and that's way too hot for most people, but I'm very cold-blooded, and I love it. Like, I'm perfect. But when I have people over, I have to lower the temperature. I'm not sweating though. That's the thing. I'm like comfortable, but when it's like any colder than that, I'm like bundled up and getting goosebumps because something's wrong with me. But
well, one of the benefits too is like in Texas, we have a lot of ceiling fans, which in California, when I grew up, we did not have ceiling fans. And so a ceiling fan can actually create a cooling effect on the body without having to, ramp down the HVAC unit to cool yourself down. So those are just some behavior modification type stuff, but things that you would still have to buy.
And what about for our northern friends, how efficient are things like furnaces and fireplaces, or are they not good for LEED certification or energy savings? like space heater situations?
I think the space heaters are probably pretty efficient, honestly. I mean, because you're only having to cool that one little space when you need it, like you're turning that dial on by hand. But obviously you're suffering a little bit if it is cold and it's not turned on. Whereas, with the HVAC unit, you've got it kind of preset. And I mean, I don't know, I don't live in the cold. So, I mean, unless there's some kind of like automatic programmable, radiant heater out there, I'm not sure. But
they can drive
yeah.
your energy bills up though.
Yeah.
If you use them too much. So
space heaters, we had space heaters in here before we realized that the insulation was crap. Our heating bill for the winter was insane because the heat was just escaping and it was so cold outside. But my in-laws, they go down to Florida. They have a place down there, so they're there now, and their house up here is set to 60, 62 or something like that. It's around 16 degrees, and that's set to when they're gone because nobody's in the house. I go to check the plants, but I'm not staying there. And then when they come back, that's when it goes back up. But my father-in-law gets cold, so it's set to like 72 because he's diabetic and has poor circulation. So it's a little warmer in there than what my mother-in-law likes. But in the summertime, we don't have air conditioning here. But a lot of people, I remember when my sister-in-law was pregnant, and she was pregnant over the summer, and her house was freezing. It was like 66 or 67. She just had it cranked because she was just so hot all the time. Nothing would make her comfortable because she was so pregnant. But it froze the rest of us out of the house. We didn't want to go in because it was too cold, and the how hot it was outside compared to walking into our house was uncomfortable. Because you either walk in, you're freezing, and then you get used to it, and then you walk back outside, and you're overwhelmed by how hot it is. So I like that whole keeping it just a couple degrees cooler than what it is outside, because I find you tend to deal with it better. It's not shock to the system.
It's probably one of those things too where like the newer models that exist, might be more energy efficient than some of the old stuff that's in some of those older houses. But
right.
I don't know, in general, like, so with LEED you can get some extra points if you can create like individual temperature options. So like say you have like a multi-level home, you would want to be able to, have a couple thermostats to like create a different temperature. Because if you're not using like a certain section of your home, you might be able to kind of like have a different temperature. But it's more prevalent with like commercial buildings and allowing the occupants to have control over their temperature at their office space. But anyways. That's all I've got for energy. I'm sure there's a whole lot more that we've talked about on other shows as far as behavior is concerned. But when it comes
Turn
to
off your
buying
lights.
stuff,
yeah,
turn off your lights. Oh,
When you're not
LED
using them.
lights. LED lights is the new thing.
They blind
uses
you.
a lot less. Yeah, it uses a lot less electricity. Doesn't create as much heat, so you're not having to cool it off. So yeah. Okay, we can move on to materials. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So with materials, the number one thing to think about is like buy local. So one thing that comes to mind is, any kind of stone material. So a lot of people like to use limestone in Texas because that's what our ground is made of. You wouldn't necessarily want to buy like granite countertops from across the world. You're paying for that shipping, and it's also not very environmentally conscious. So some of the cheaper things is like doing like a concrete countertop, and it lasts long, and it doesn't necessarily use a lot of like toxic chemicals. So when you're looking at materials, you want to look at like what is it made out of, what could be off-gassing from that material into the air and causing health problems. So carpets obviously are not ideal. Fabrics, you want to keep them kind of more of a natural fiber than synthetic. Paint and any kind of like sealants that you use in the home as well. you would want to make sure that those are, like less toxic for the environment and how it's processed, and then for, the human beings that are going to be living in the building.
Circulation. That's important there.
So also, the major points you get in LEED is looking at like recycled content. So there's different, like things you can look for when you're buying these materials. It'll tell you what percentage of recycled content they might have in any of these materials. And some looking at reclaimed items, you might be able to repurpose some old, wood or something and create some awesome wood floors or siding or something. And then also when it comes to wood, look for the Forest Stewardship Council seal. It's another little logo to look for on any kind of wood products. And that just makes sure that the wood was harvested sustainably. And what else? Also, so if you're thinking about like cabinets or even furniture, those types of things, you would look at stuff that can be reused, reclaimed from older items, and you can give it a new life. So this kind of yeah.
On that note, can I brag real quick on my my deck? I had my neighbor rebuild my deck because it was just splinters and peeling paint and it was falling apart. And he built new furniture out of my old deck, like the wood from it. And it's so cool. Like I geek out about it just looking at it. I'm like, this used to be the floor and now I sit on it. And it's cool too. It's like unique. Nobody has it. So yeah, you make furniture out of this stuff. You could, like you said, rebuild pieces of your house. So you can get really creative with some of these old items. So anyways.
Yeah. So in LEED, there's like a calculation you do if you're able to use recycled content or regional materials or reclaiming old materials and putting them in the building, and you get different points for your rating system depending on like what percentage of your overall cost of materials was like more sustainable options. So this kind of overlaps with indoor air a little bit. We talked about like toxic chemicals going into the indoor space. And so a lot of that is just for the health of the people breathing the air once the building has been built. It's kind of like that new car smell, right? Like same thing happens in the new home. It's all of those kind of chemicals from everything that got put into the inside of the house. It's off-gassing and you're breathing those things in. So with the paint, you would want low VOC, which is volatile organic compounds. It's basically those chemicals kind of breaking down from the paint and getting into the air. So you would want to do some flushing of it if it's a brand new, spanking new, whatever. If you just painted, you want to make sure windows are open, you're getting fresh air in. Make sure you're timing it for the right kind of season to be able to do that, so you're not going to create a mold problem or be wasting a lot of electricity. So obviously in Texas, spring and fall, we would, that's the time to paint. You can keep the windows open. What else? And then just in general, like it's good to get some fresh air into your space. And so with the home, it's, less common to have fresh air intake. Like you're generally just recirculating the air that is in your home. The HVAC unit does not take outside air and bring it into your house. So it's just that fan that you see, it's just the propellant of like releasing the heat that it's sucking out of your home. So open up some windows, open up some doors whenever you can, when the weather is the same temperature that you would want inside your home, if that makes sense. So those temperature ranges that we talked about earlier, if it's that temperature outside, that's the time to have the doors and windows open, and you can shut off your HVAC unit because it's within your comfortable zone of temperature. So with air filters, you would want to look at the MERV rating, MERV. So the higher the MERV rating, it's going to have smaller pores in that air filter. So it'll be capturing any kind of like air pollutants and bacteria and pollen and mold and all those kinds of things. So it can help clean up your air a little bit better. But you also don't want to go too high if you're not going to be replacing that air filter regularly, because once it gets clogged, then your HVAC unit is working much harder to push air through. So if you're going to buy a high MERV rated filter, you want to make sure that you're replacing that every month. Even though it says it can last 90 days, I wouldn't trust that. So a lot of people will just do a smaller MERV rating because they're not necessarily worried. You know, they open their windows all the time and they think they have good air quality, or maybe they don't have allergy problems, you know, those kinds of things. And so they'll get a lower MERV rating air filter. It's cheaper, and, you know, you can replace that every, 60 days or so.
Would you recommend a air purifier?
It just depends. I mean, a lot of those can just use a lot of electricity and not actually create much of a difference for your airspace. So just do your research. Like all of our previous shows, everyone has to, kind of like read up on it, do your research, figure out, what's going to work best for your space and your area. Like I live in downtown San Antonio. Air quality is probably not great. So it's important for me to do that. But if you live out in the country and, you're not too worried about polluted air, then it might not be a problem. But a lot of people have like seasonal allergies too, so it might be nice to get the pollens and stuff out of your system. So yeah, I guess I would recommend if you do have those issues, just put it next to your bed, because that's where you spend the majority of your time inside your home. And then yeah, so that's the MERV rating for the air filter. Any kind of like chemicals that you might be using to clean your home, or like I think there's a certification called Green Guard, and so you can look for that logo when you're looking for any kind of like paints or sealants, any of those kinds of like chemicals that you would be using. There's a Green Guard certification. It basically just makes sure that it has low VOCs, like low VOC paints is one of the main ones. So that's all I have for air, and then we can get into waste and recycling. So whenever you're building a new building, LEED really wants you to not throw all of the construction waste into the landfill. So they want you to find ways to recycle it, reuse it, donate it, those types of things. But if you already own your home, then they want you to look at making sure you have recycling and compost stations that are commingled. So it increases the amount of the recycling rate if everything is like next to each other, because people are lazy. And if you don't have a recycle bin, nearby, it's going to go in the trash. So especially if you have a lot of guests that come over and that kind of thing. But this is, again, more geared towards, office buildings and that kind of stuff. What else? So yeah, and then there's the non-toxic pest control. So a lot of people spray the exterior or interior of their homes to keep the pests out. And there are like organic, less toxic options out there. So again, look at what's out there in your area, or if you're hiring someone to do that, ask them to use organic. They have it, it exists. It might cost you a little bit more, but you might not be causing health problems for yourself down the line. So that's important to look at as well. And then obviously, as Chris is familiar, home size is an important factor. The bigger the home, the more you're paying to keep the interior space cool or hot, depending on what season it is. So your electric bill and your water bill tend to go up the bigger the home that you have. So and then just look for durability, like we talk about for all of our other shows. Buy stuff that's going to last a long time for your house. Look for those long-term investments. Don't buy the cheap flooring that's going to like scratch and scuff and fall apart or break down within a year or two. Concrete flooring is great if you have that option, because you don't have to put anything on top of it. You can just stain the concrete, and if you're in a cold region, a lot of people put like radiant features in the floor so it keeps your floors warm.
It's nice.
And that's actually a good energy efficiency thing too, because you can create the heat from the bottom up, because heat rises. So yeah, that's all I got.
That's it.
Y'all can start talking.
Jen's done.
Jeez. You hardly gave us anything to work with, Jen.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No,
It
that's
is kind of hard because when you're
great
buying a
information.
new house, you kind of get wrapped up into the like, oh, look at those like wood floors and look at those, countertops and look at the bathroom and the size and it's hard, it's like our culture to want these things, but you can ask for it to be green. You can, tell your realtor what you want and they can find it for you. So I think even some cities are requiring energy bills to be a part of the home buying process. So if you list your home, they're required to supply like the annual report that kind of shows you what the annual bill would be.
Yeah.
And I don't know that that's happening everywhere, but it's definitely something to for sure ask for, because on the same street, someone's energy bill could be $400 and someone's could be like $100, depending on all that stuff we talked about today.
Mhm.
So it's a good thing to consider.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And then looking at, so for us, this is our buying another house. So this will be our 4th time doing this. So at this point, it's like, how old are the windows? How old are the doors?
How old is the HVAC?
How old is this house? What's been updated? What's the insulation situation like? What's the foundation like? And what are the heating costs? What's it heated with? So it depends on where you live here. We don't have natural gas here or in the town next to us, but in the town that we're looking at, they do have natural gas, and it is cheaper than heating your house with hydroelectricity. So there's that too. It's like, I don't like having to heat the house with propane or natural gas, but heating it here where we are, it's just electric. It is more expensive. So our space is small, but our electric bill is comparable to that of a house that's like 3 times the size, because that's all that's heating it. Even the fireplace is run on an electric fan. So
Wait, doesn't Ray work for a nuclear power plant?
it doesn't mean we get a discount.
Get you.
You're not gonna discount.
Did you get a direct line to the?
No, and it's actually more expensive because we live in a rural area, so the delivery fees are more. So if we lived in a more populated area, our delivery fees would go down. But the air quality is better here. So when you were saying air quality, I had the door and windows open the other day because it was like 6 degrees out. And I'm like, oh, it's like spring. So I had everything open, and it was really nice for like a couple hours, and then it got cold. But yeah, everything gets open as soon as we can, because I like that fresh air. And even in the wintertime, if the fireplace is pumping out too much heat, we open up windows and do that. But yeah, looking at, I mean, as pretty as some things are, it's like, okay, yeah, but how old are the windows? And has this been lovingly maintained? Yes, no. Why is it priced so high? Well, because they put a lot of work into it and it's worth it, so you don't have to. Or it's like, it needs a bulldozer, and that's so cheap. So,
Yeah. Well, I once listened to a podcast about green buildings, and the person talking said that the greenest building is the one that already exists, meaning the energy and the resources it takes to build a new building, whether it's a house or a commercial building, are pretty astronomical, especially if you're trying to, be as efficient as possible. It can get expensive, but if you are looking at, from a resource perspective, something that's already there and rehabbing it and kind of retrofitting it, you're not disturbing another piece of land, like Jen said. You're not getting raw resources, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to kind of look at the balance, I guess, between how much is it going to cost, or how many resources am I going to have to replace, versus if I do it new, it's all kind of one of those situation to situation things.
Yeah, so what happened in Austin maybe 10 years ago has been happening in San Antonio the past 5 years, where they're renovating all the like east side of the downtown areas where generally it was, low income, older homes over 100 years, and they're basically bringing them down to the stud and the foundation, and they're getting rid of everything else because it's so inefficient. Like, so that was a lot of the balancing act, like you talked about. Like some buildings really are just going to be a little too old to keep the windows and the siding and the roof and all that stuff. But again, you're not disturbing fresh forest to build a new home. So, yeah, I wouldn't recommend buying a home that's like super old because you're going to put more into it. But again, you'd have to do those calculations depending on where you live to buy brand new versus to renovate something old and what that total cost would be. Because there is some renovation jobs that you're just like, money pit, what did I just do?
Yeah.
And so
there are some really interesting and creative buildings now, though, that are made of old shipping containers or vehicles even. Like people are kind of retrofitting them and making them tiny, sometimes very tiny homes if it's like an old school bus or something. But it can be done, and it makes it a lot more interesting and unique if you're able to do it well. So
yes, if you're able to do it well, that's the thing, because I have seen some school bus conversions, and I worry about them because they don't replace the windows, the school bus windows, and those school bus windows
insulation,
and there's no insulation. Like those windows are to be lived in. So when people are like, we got a schoolie and here are all the windows, it's like, don't go in a cold climate because you're gonna freeze your butt off.
Yeah,
that's where you're
good luck
from. Yeah, and here we had single. So this building, our cottage was built in 1963. So when we bought it, it was the original single pane windows. So I remember before we did our bedroom, we had Vaporberry over the window, but I still had to wear a toque to bed, a beanie to bed, because it was still so cold because single pane did nothing. It was absolutely, so they're all gone now, but yeah, single pane is in a cottage that you're not living in, fine, but it sucks. And it's a huge heat.
Yeah. And there are some creative things you can do with some of the renovation materials if you're looking to upgrade some things. Like if you're into gardening or you need storage space, you could build a shed or a greenhouse or some kind of a cold frame. Yeah. I was actually looking at like getting an old window from the Habitat Restore and just using it for my plants to transition them to the outside. But there's greenhouses made of nothing but windows and bottles and
great.
Like
and
that.
The Restore is fantastic. Even if you go to building supply stores like Home Depot or what's that equivalent? Lowe's. They have windows and doors and stuff that have been returned that were either custom orders or just construction projects that got canceled, and they're at a reduced price.
Yeah.
And you can go in and ask for what they already have in stock, and that's how we got our patio doors, because it was from a renovation project that they decided at the last minute they didn't want, but because it's so big and it's not white, they couldn't get rid of it, so we got it at a great price. So,
or the oops paint or the wood scraps or whatever.
Anything like that they have, because they can't sell it, they can't put it out on their regular retail floor. So if you go and ask what they've got behind the desk, sometimes you can get some really great brand new awesome stuff for a really reduced price, because new windows are very expensive. They're very expensive, so it's a good way to sort of get the best of both worlds.
Absolutely. Well, Jen, thank you so much for that very extensive overview. Did you have anything else before we move on to Green Life Hacks? I think you covered pretty much everything we could think of. Everything I wrote down, you covered. So if folks want to learn more about LEED or get more extensive kind of checklists or ideas, where can they go? What kind of resources would you recommend for people?
I like the TCEQ website for behavior modification ideas within the home, but also gives you some good pointers on appliance replacements and those types of things. It's under the Take Care of Texas website that they have within the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. And then again, you could just go to U.S. Green Building Council if you're more interested in global commercial, hospitals and those types of buildings and stuff. And really, you can just kind of Google around for, green building. Even before this show, you can I did a few searches and a lot of stuff pops up, top 10 things to do to save energy or, those types of things. So
You
there's a
could
lot
go down
out
a
there.
YouTube rabbit hole of,
Yeah.
all sorts of
And
repairs.
YouTube will even show you how to install it all properly.
And God bless the people who make those videos, because I cannot tell you how many I watch and I just think, why would anybody make this? It's a purely selfless thing. They're doing it just because they figured it out and they knew someone else would need it, and it is a lifesaver sometimes. So thank you guys if you do that.
They probably put a lot of plumbers out of business.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just kidding. It's not
No,
true.
there's a shortage of plumbers.
I know.
Actually. And TCEQ, or Take Care of Texas, also will send you resources if you are a teacher or an educator or just someone that wants to give out like cards, informational stuff on a lot of the things we talked about. You can just order them on their website for free. At least they used to. I think they still do.
Yeah, and on the U.S. Green Building website, there's free educational courses that you can watch. It's usually like older presentations, slide presentations that folks are giving on, again, kind of a higher level global or, commercial building or residential builders, so it's maybe a little bit less geared towards the home owner, but it's still out there as a resource.
Awesome. All right, well, with that, we're going to move on to our green life hacks. So this is where we share kind of an item or experience or program that we have benefited from or we've recently discovered and we want to share with our listeners. So Chris, would you like to go first today?
Sure. So cell phones are everybody's. It's crazy how much they've taken over our lives to the point that we haven't had a landline in like almost a decade because we all have cell phones. But cell phones are very expensive and they keep coming out with new ones every 6 months to a year to sort of, it's bigger, it's better, it holds more memory and all this stuff. So it entices you, and with Apple now getting caught making their older models actually slower and more efficient, you have to buy the newer model. You're constantly getting a new cell phone every couple of years, but it's so expensive. And for us here, our cell phone companies have a monopoly. We have paid some of, if not the highest cell phone bills in the world. It's stupid. We only have 3 cell phone companies in Canada. That's it. There's no and they're basically, they get to do whatever they want with us. And so what we do is hand-me-down phones. So they work just as well. I only use mine to make phone calls and take pictures. So my phone is a Generation 7. It used to be Ray's phone. My daughter has a phone that used to be my sister-in-law's. That's a couple generations old. And then my son has my old phone that's like, you can't buy phone cases for anymore because it doesn't exist. But all he needs it for is to download some games. And he's got an app that he can text me if he's home alone. He's almost 12. So you don't need the brand new cell phone, even though it's flashy and the new Apple has like 3 cameras on it, which I don't quite understand why it needs 3 cameras. But it's $1,000, and you may not have to pay $1,000 up front, but you have to pay it a little chunk on your bill every single time, which means you can't switch That means you can't switch your cell phone plan without paying a huge penalty. So the plan is hopefully soon when Ray's done paying off his phone, because it takes 2 to 3 years to pay off a phone without getting penalized, that we're going to try and not buy any new phones so that we can pick our cell phone plan and bring down the cost, because we also have no unlimited data here either. You have to pay for that.
Wow. And it doesn't help that they kind of built in obsolescence, right? With those, they slow them down, they make them not last very long. And
yeah, they slow them down. Like Logan's phone, I think, is a 6S, which is, now they have an Apple 11. So hers is slow. And we've noticed with that, you can't add memory to it, so you can't make it more efficient or anything like that. Her battery life's not as great. So she was asking us today if she could get a 10, and it's like, those are $900. No. Do you plan on getting a job anytime soon and saving up all your money? So they're really expensive. And in Canada here, our cell phone plans and cell phone companies just suck. They suck. And so for us, that's what we're trying to get around is secondhand cell phones.
Yeah, the other thing is there's a lot of precious metals that go into those, and you're saving those resources and,
and they're
using them.
So unless your phone is literally, you have everything on it and it's your business and your home life and everything, when you need something current all the time, the older series, like 1 or 2 generations, even I think mine's like 5 now, they're fine, they work. You don't need the brand new one, as much as it is, because they still break. They're still really fragile, even if you have a life case on them.
Yeah. Cool. Great tip. Jen, what is your green life hack for today?
So I have a hard time choosing. All right. I'm going to do 2.
Okay.
Or maybe, okay. So because we talked about indoor air quality today, when we were needing to buy a new rug for our living room, because my husband refuses to not have one, he needs to warm up the space. We had to look for something that could be washable, because our cat and our dog kept like throwing up on our old one. It was just getting super gross. So we got this brand called Ruggable. It's like super thin, but it has like a base matte layer that it kind of like sticks to, so it doesn't like move around. But you can just like peel it off and throw it in the washing machine, and it can clean itself. So that'll help improve like indoor air quality, because a lot of times like carpets and rugs and stuff and even curtains will absorb a lot of those indoor pollutants. And so being able to wash it and clean it was important for me. So that was the brand that we found, and I believe it had like some recycled content in it, so I felt happy about our selection. I'll save the other one for the next show. Yeah, it's called Ruggable. You just go online and it shows you all the different patterns that they have out there and stuff, but I'm not a fan of having them at all, because I'm just like, you're just creating another thing for our cat to ruin. But
it's a good compromise.
Marriage is balance. That's the key, right? So you have to compromise.
Well, I have a indoor air quality one as well, and I'm hoping after our discussion that it's actually a green life hack and I'm not like inadvertently making my life worse somehow. But I've been using a washable air filter now, like a reusable one, for a year or 2, because I just hated buying the cheap air filters, or some of them aren't cheap, but the ones that you get in the store that are just good for a month or 2 and then you throw them out, and it just seems very wasteful. So I found one that you can actually spray down and clean. I'm not always the best at doing it as often as I need to, so that's probably an issue. But I'm curious now, what are your thoughts on those, Jen? Because after hearing your discussion about a certain rating, which I did not know about or look for at the time, I'm wondering if I'm just making my air quality worse by trying to reduce waste.
I don't have a whole lot of knowledge on them. I mean, I know they existed, but unless you're able to really get all those pollutants out, and I can't imagine that you're going to have like a high filtration rate of air pollutants. You might just be capturing like dust and hair and, the general floaty stuff that you can actually see with the eye. But when it comes down to like particulate matter, you probably aren't filtering those things out. So it just depends on, if you're not worried about air quality and you're not having allergies and stuff, it might be fine for you. Everybody has different needs.
Well, I justified it, it was like $30 up front, but I was like, well, that's, a few months or a year of regular air filters, it'll pay for itself. And so I guess my green life hack may not be so green this month, but look into that option. Maybe there are some that are better than others if you are so inclined, and have the discipline to actually take it out every month and clean it, which I don't always
I
do.
mean, I think it goes back to like finding one, like what works for you and your needs, and then finding that balance between like environment, because some, like we've talked about before in other shows, it's like some stuff that's good for the environment directly sometimes isn't always good for people. Like, so this is an example of that. Like, you're not creating the waste, but you're also maybe creating a health problem long term. Like, I don't know, maybe it's collecting mold or something and you don't know about it. Who knows? So it's, again, like, you just have to make sure you're following whatever manufacturer guidelines are for that particular air filter.
I'm blowing mold spores through my air vents instead of like catching the pollution. This is great. Well, on that note,
sorry, we can end it with this. There's always like the finding there's like the three main circles that all interlink with one another, and like finding that happy medium. So it's always like money, people, and the environment. So finding that synergy is kind of the money spot, or whatever you want to call it, for all of this stuff. So, and it goes for every component that you look at. If you're going to buy an HVAC unit and it's super high efficient, but it costs too much, then, that's not always going to work out. So, you have to do those decisions on your own.
Well, that's a good point, because I am guilty a lot of times of sacrificing my personal health or mental well-being to do something that's good for the environment, and then I end up super stressed and unhappy and miserable because I'm taking home all the leftovers from work to compost or recycle because nobody else will do it. And hashtag not bitter, but it adds up sometimes when you're trying to like do all of it and you can't.
Yeah. So. It's called self-care, and you might need to work on that if you feel like you're taking on too much.
Yes. Well, Chris, where can we find you online?
You can find me here at Sustainably Geeky, also on Epically Geeky, and we have a show on Saturday that we're doing, and then Marginally Geeky, and we just did an episode last week, and then our new show, Creatively Geeky, which we did a show last week, like the week of podcasts, I think. And that's out at the end of every month. And on Instagram at The Borough Life.
The Borough Life. Awesome. Mm-hmm. And Jen, are you still exclusive to Sustainably Geeky?
Yep. If you have questions or comments, just put them here on this post and we'll respond.
Yes.
You can find me here.
We will get your questions to Jen if it's something I can't answer, which is most likely for this topic. And you can find me here on Sustainably Geeky, on the other shows Chris mentioned, Creatively Geeky, Epically Geeky, our parent show, and Marginally Geeky, which is our book club. You can also find me on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Het's Gonna Be Me. And most recently, you can find me if you're in the Central Texas area on KNCT Simply Beautiful. 91.3. We are FM. We are starting a new show every Monday at 6:15 p.m. called the Centex Planeteers, named for a local group that I started. And it's just kind of some sustainability snippets. So it's a much more abridged version of this show, I guess. It's just me giving a quick 5-minute, overview of a certain topic, the Cliff's Notes version. So that started last Monday, and hopefully you'll catch it on the radio if you listen to the radio. So and then of course you can find the show wherever you listen to podcasts. Please give us a 5-star rating or a like or whatever the appropriate action is, and subscribe to us. Share us with your friends and let us know what you want to hear about. We have a lot of topics lined up, but we would love some suggestions from our listeners. And I think that's it. So look us up, Sustainably Geeky, and we appreciate you guys listening. Have a great rest of your day.